So should we just get started, Sophie? Okay. So let's sure I got all my stuff here. Welcome everybody to the Community Development Committee, and just a roll call right now. Councilor Perry present, Councilor Robinson, Councilor Osher, Councilor Maynard. I don't see anybody else, so we will kick it off with the first item on our agenda. Zone change, amending standard related to the self-storage on I-95. Is this a Kyle thing?
It is.
Okay.
Everyone, is my audio okay? Okay. So we talked about this concept briefly at a previous meeting. There are a number of uses in our land use table that have a condition that they're only allowed west of I-95. This is mostly larger scale commercial or light and industrial type uses, light industry, warehouses, self-storage facilities, things like that. But we have a self-storage facility located on Park Street that's been in existence, and the owner of that property was hoping to expand. And as it's an established existing business and serves a function in that area of town, we came forward previously with the idea of doing a conditional use zone that would amend that west of the interstate standard, and also then switch the zone of that property from the C2 to the C1, so that you're doing two things. First, you're getting rid of the standard specifically for self-storage facilities east of the interstate in existence, right now or previously, which limits it basically to just this one that we're talking about. But at the same time, you're switching the property from a C2 to a C1. So you're switching it to a district where self-storage facilities are an allowable use. And in doing this, you make it a legally conforming use, and it would allow the property owner to expand the use, so long as it fit other requirements in the ordinance. So this is the language that would do that. The first section is amending the west of 95 standard. The second section is the creation of the conditional use district, where you would put any, what sort of uses are allowed, what's not allowed, any other performance standards that you wanted to put in place to restrict what's happening on the lot, like you would in a contract zone where you write into the contract, anything specific to the lot. This is where it would go. So the way I did it was say that any use that's allowable in both the C1 and the C2 would be allowed here. So if you basically think of it as a Venn diagram, and you think on this side, you have C1 uses that are more industrial, and then on the other side, you have C2 uses that are more residential. Those would be the things not allowed here. And the middle area would be the uses allowed in both districts, which are pretty much all commercial uses: restaurants, retail stores, service businesses, movie theaters, things like that. So you're still maintaining a lot of the same uses that are allowed in the current C2 district. By switching it to C1, you're really just limiting some of the residential uses from the C2 side and limiting some of the industrial uses on the C1 side, and you're adding in self-storage facilities as an allowable use. So there could be an expansion. If the council was okay in moving forward with this, we've had some conversations, and we think the kind of the logical next step would be, instead of going ahead and adopting this and going through with an actual official zone change and having to update the map and all of that, that it would make sense for the next step to be the property owner to come forward with an actual plan specifically of what they want to do, as any expansion to that self-storage facility would be required to go to the planning board for site plan approval, because self-storage facilities require planning board review, and any expansion of a use requiring site plan review has to go back to the board. So before staff, puts in the time of altering the ordinance and going through that official process, that the applicant come forward with their planning board application, basically, so that we can see that what the applicant or the property owner is looking to do would actually be possible. And then at that point, once we realize that, we could go forward with both the development proposal with the planning board and the zone change and the ordinance amendment. Versus if we went forward with the ordinance amendment now, and then down the line, we find out it doesn't fit in with exactly what the property owner wants to do, then you basically amended the ordinance for nothing. So that's sort of where we are, just looking for feedback on that, and how people feel about the conditional use in general, if there's still kind of a feeling of support, and if people are okay with those next steps of reaching out to the property owner.
Thank you, Kyle. So yeah, I mean, we've obviously talked about this before, and we're kind of all feeling that this was actually a good thing to do, and I agree with you on the next steps, bringing the property owner in here to kind of explain to us what it would look like. But I also, is there any of the other counselors that have any additional input?
I agree with you, Terry.
Yeah, I was going to say I would be interested in hearing what the planning board has to say. So I think this step makes sense.
I apologize for arriving a couple minutes late, but being familiar with this from before and hearing the tail end of that, I'm inclined to agree with the comments so far.
Right. And so just to clarify, so if the property owner came forward with a planning board application, we could take the contract or the conditional use ordinance amendment here and the project itself to the planning board at the same time. And the planning board could make a conditional decision on the actual development that it not be, a building permit not be allowed or issued until the council made the final decision on the conditional use and the ordinance amendment. So.
That sounds right to me, Kyle.
That sounds good to me. And would we have feedback from the planning board on the conditional amendment as well? Yeah.
Right. So the planning board would be reviewing the development kind of addition to the business side through the site plan criteria process like they normally would. And they would be making a recommendation on the ordinance amendment side like they would for any other ordinance amendment or zoning change.
Works for me.
Yep, makes sense.
All right, thanks.
Anything additional from anybody before Kyle moves off from this one?
Nope.
Great. So we'll move on to number 3, excavation/fill ordinance revision, planning board recommendations, next steps.
Okay, so it's been a while since we last talked about this, between the pandemic and this one being a little lengthier of a conversation at the planning board level. It was discussed over a few meetings. But yeah, we're finally ready to bring this back. So the planning board did have a few recommended changes. If you'll remember, the general way that we looked at the earth moving before was, 0 to 20 cubic yards was allowed, 20 to 100 was a permit through the code enforcement officer, and then above 100 cubic yards was site plan review through the planning board. So in our initial draft, we put some extra things in there to kind of look at the impact, on lots. So we looked at things like, in the higher density areas, with smaller lots under 20,000 square feet, making those go to the planning board for review. If there was fill of over 20 cubic yards near a property line, that would go to the planning board. So the board's main comments, though, first, they recommended that in the forest and agriculture specifically, on legal lots in the forest and agriculture. So that's a legal lot in the forest and agriculture district is at least 160,000 square feet. So which is roughly 4 acres, a little less. That the amount of fill that would trigger site plan approval, instead of it being 100 cubic yards like it is elsewhere, it would be 200 cubic yards. And their rationale, for making that, recommendation was that, the next biggest minimum lot size in town is 60,000 square feet in the low density residential district. And, so with the forest and agriculture district, you're looking at a much larger minimum lot size at almost 4 acres. So it makes sense that, that number perhaps be bumped up a little bit. So that was the first big recommendation they had. Second, can be found on page 2, and it's in section 2E. It's an exemption that would exempt existing driveways and off-street parking areas from needing to get planning board approval for fill of over 100 cubic yards if all they were doing was maintaining or repairing the existing impervious area. So this wouldn't, if someone was looking to expand at all the impervious surface area and they were looking to change any area from vegetated to unvegetated, this exemption wouldn't apply. It would be specifically for those situations where someone has a really long driveway and they want to kind of fill in some areas that need to be filled. And that way they could do it just through a permit, because a lot of what the planning board is looking at is, the disturbance of earth and not just, laying down some material over an existing impervious area. Where you wouldn't really be altering drainage flows and things like that. Okay, so moving on to page 4 was the next, not so much recommendation as far as a change goes, but just something to consider, was in section 3A. So one of the things we talked about before it went to the planning board was the idea of those projects that were going to the code enforcement officer for a permit. The code enforcement officer had the option to consult with the town engineer. And if through that process, it was determined that more information was required, the code enforcement officer could refer the project to the planning board if they thought there wasn't enough information to make the decision. And I think reading the ordinance that there is some merit to this of getting a legal opinion on this section, because I do think that there's a way to interpret the ordinance that would say that the code enforcement officer has to make a decision of either approval or denial on a permit. And I'm not sure the subjective nature of deciding that it needs to be reviewed by the planning board is allowed by our ordinance in its current capacity. So I think that should probably be looked at before this goes to council public hearing, just to verify. I don't know, Sophie, if you have any feedback on that part.
I think you would be fine if you put a kind of a checklist of if certain elements were tripped, then the code officer would refer it to planning board. But I think you're right that you can't vest him with too much power. You need to define what that power is.
Right. Right. So that's obviously then, yeah, something we'll have to define before that gets finalized. And then finally, the last thing was just a clarification. Number 7, the very last section on the last page. We had talked about sort of what types of materials would be allowed to be used for bringing on fill and material to a lot. And the planning board asked for some clarifying language just to describe kind of what clean material meant So we've added the line there that says any material used shall be free of solid waste, construction and demolition debris, and radioactive or hazardous waste. Other than that, the board made its recommendation to move forward and send it back to council. So obviously those recommendations are just that, they're recommendations, they're open to discussion, and interested to hear what everyone has to say.
So does anybody have any thoughts, comments, questions?
These seem like reasonable recommendations. I didn't have any problem with them.
Yeah, the recommendations make sense to me. I'm kind of in line with the getting a legal opinion on the subjective nature. So we have something to back us up when somebody says you let our neighbor do this and you're not letting us do it. So that's my thought.
Kyle, can you remind members of the public how impervious is defined? When you use the term impervious, what are we talking about?
Right, so impervious would basically be anything that's not vegetated. So it could be a structure, it could be a driveway, whether it's gravel or paved. Yeah. So if we're, it's not just referring to a paved parking lot, it could be referring to someone's gravel driveway at their house. And that's consistent with our shoreland zoning ordinance, which basically, when it looks at lot coverage, it's looking at anything that's not vegetated is considered to be impervious.
So when we talk about being able to add, as long as you're not changing the area that is impervious, what about major shifts in contour?
So I think that would then be picked up possibly by one of the other standards that we put in. So those other standards would still apply. So if someone was looking at, just adding material onto an already impervious area, but it was within 10 feet of the property line, then the exemption, then wouldn't apply to that. Or if it was creating, a slope of, that's mentioned in there of a certain scale, then it wouldn't apply. So I think there's still some safeguards in there against, really kind of riskier projects.
And if it were to create or divert a major runoff, then that would be captured in the property maintenance ordinance, correct?
Sure.
So, I mean, these all sound good, like good recommendations and such. But I also just want to say, Kyle, you really are quite amazing to listen to with this stuff. So I appreciate your knowledge and your ability to convey how this all looks, because I'm definitely not in the world of understanding this stuff. So it makes it easy. And I just want to say thank you, because you make it easy for me to understand in layman's terms what you're talking about. So thank you.
Great, thanks for that.
Not just to pile on the praise for Kyle, because good Lord, we do that too much already. But it's like, you think of just about everything too. I mean, it's rare that I've ever seen Sophie or any of us throw you a curveball you can't handle. So thank you for that very much. There's the last, in item 7, it talked about different components plus the hazardous waste. And I don't have it in front of me. I have the Zoom in front of me right now.
Sure.
But it's about clean glass and porcelain. That is standard fare. And cured pavement or cured concrete. That's standard fare for fill, right? So if somebody sees that, that's not
right
being snuck in there. I just want to make that really clear.
Right, yeah, that was taken from DEP language.
I'd like to say too, thank you for including the minutes from the January 20th meeting, because that was pre-COVID and I could never, I can't remember back that far. so that was helpful as well. So thank you.
Are there any more thoughts, comments for Kyle? Hearing none. We'll move on to number 4 on our agenda. It's
Thanks,
a
everyone.
request, council resolution supporting universal health care. Sophie, is this yours?
I will start it. So council actually talked about this in workshop. We have Dr. Burgoyne here today. She also joined you in workshop. The initial resolution that was presented to council focused or had quite a bit of language around trying to quantify the impact to Maine and the impact to Orono of the not having an equitable and affordable healthcare access. And although that is normally where council likes to go with any kind of resolution, the discussion at the workshop really asked staff to elevate this to a more of a statement of ideology, more of a statement of general support. So that is what we tried to do. We tried to take what was given to us and give it a context, but also not try to extrapolate a lot of facts and figures that may or may not be accurate. So what you have in front of you right now is the staff cut of the resolution. That is, you're urging the Maine legislature to create an equitable health care plan that provides every Maine resident with comprehensive medical care from birth to death. That's all I have.
I like the language. I like the revision of equitable healthcare plan and not universal healthcare. I think universal healthcare has a political bent to it right now as we are, but this looks equitable healthcare looks like it can go in any direction, but it's still about making sure that everyone is covered, that we support that. So I like this new language.
Excellent point, Cheryl. I agree.
So the only question I had, the whereas eliminating the high administrative cost and waste would be beneficial to families in our state, including those in Orono. While I don't agree with the statement, it just didn't seem to fit with the rest of the whereases. Did anybody else wonder about that?
Well, to Sophie's defense on that, it actually was a bit more broad, but I was thinking more about it was about Orono, but I mean, I'm up to talk, beyond that.
So I have absolutely no authorship of that. That comes straight from Bangor minus the including those in Orono. So,
Okay.
And I will tell you from a formatting standpoint, if you wanted to lose that line completely, that would really be okay. It would allow us a little bit more flexibility in formatting, or we can change the language. That's
I don't feel strongly about it. I just, as I was reading through it, it seemed to flow from one to the other in that one. Whereas, as I say, while I didn't disagree with it, it just didn't seem to be as closely connected.
I think that's because the rest of it's my language and that piece is from Bangor. So you've got two authors, and that's probably why it's competing. Happy to take it out.
What do they mean by waste? What is
You'd have to
that?
ask.
Bangor?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd actually be more comfortable. Am I? Yeah, I'd actually be more comfortable without that whereas, but I could go with the majority.
I'm okay with that. I have no special fondness of it, so.
I think Tom brings up a good point with this, and also the fact if we have to ask what something means in a resolution that we're passing, I think that's a huge red flag that we should yank that.
in agreement.
Well, there.
You're saying to take out that whole whereas, the whole section?
Yes.
That was my suggestion, yes.
That sounds good.
Any additional thoughts?
So the other question I had, Terry, I apologize, but the other question I had was, I have said in the last whereas, developing and deploying this system of equitable and affordable access to adequate healthcare is beyond the scope of the town of Orono's available resources. I struggled to come up with an appropriate term, and I don't know if resources is the term you want, because if we did have unlimited resources, would we take on that responsibility? So I don't know if it's just about throwing us money as much as it's not a local government role, but I didn't know how to say that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say it's more not in our authority or our charge. I don't know.
So Sophie, if you just changed it to beyond the scope of local government
Oh,
be-
nice. Yep.
and just eliminate the rest of the whereas,
That's a nice fix.
Very good, Tom.
Thank you.
Great. So any other thoughts, comments? So Sophie, I think with those changes, it appears that the council's okay with it.
The committee, yeah. Good work, Sophie. I think you did a great job sort of synthesizing what we were talking about last time.
I aim to please.
all right.
Great. So hearing nothing else about this particular item, let's move on to number 5. Request to apply for DEP waste diversion grant funds.
So before I pass this over to the person that's really running with this, I want to just put it in context for you. My hope is that we can get some feedback from the town council today as to whether or not you support the application for DEP funds for a proposed project. If you do, this item would go on the agenda for Monday's council meeting. So that's why it probably feels like it's just coming up out of nowhere. But I actually, reached out to Councillor Robertson and asked for some help because we have been fielding calls from people who do not qualify for residential recycling. And she has taken the call and has been running with it and had a meeting with members of staff earlier today. And are you comfortable with that setup, Cheryl? You're on mute.
I was just saying that to Belle today. I've had 900 Zoom meetings and I keep forgetting to unmute. Yeah, the only thing that, so I'm assuming that the committee has read this, so I don't have to go through this. I just got the DEP RFP in my box just a few days ago. So, and the due date is November 16th. So, so we're kind of putting a rush on it, just to kind of, so I've been talking to landlords. I had a conversation with the Housing Foundation this afternoon, and everyone's in agreement that recycling has become, I'm just going to say, we've had lots of conversations. Recycling has become kind of a lifestyle for people now. And that, talking to Belle and getting some, pre-info about what's kind of happening. We have over 3,000 residents right now, renters, who don't have access to any kind of a recycling program. So all of their waste just goes into the trash, and then it just gets picked up that way from dumpsters. And the complexes, the big complexes, and some of our landlords are paying for those dumpsters. So, but what they really need is, or what they really have been asking for, is a recycling program. So, so this kind of fell. It kind of was coincidence that it kind of happened all at the same time. So we're really looking to help those residents that don't have access, and I've had a chance to talk with Rob, and we've got some plans kind of in the works right now, but I haven't had a chance to talk to the committee yet, the environment committee yet, and I'd like to include them on some of this. And just, so what we really just need from council is just to help write this grant application, and it will be, it's only for a year, starts in January, and it will be to help implement a program or a pilot. I could even say a pilot program, help implement a pilot program to see how it goes. And we have several plans kind of in the works, but I haven't had a chance to talk to the actual committee yet about some of this stuff. So we're just really looking at for now, just looking at a go ahead to just begin this, begin the process of applying for a grant. And then, and we do have some numbers down right now, but nothing is concrete at the moment.
So although Cheryl doesn't have details yet, she's working through that. I think it would be important for council to know that she's working through it with staff, that this isn't something rogue, that she, when we talk about this program, we are purposefully trying to create something that is sustainable in the long run. So everybody will have access. It would meet the same ideas that we would be rolling out for any staff-led grant. This is something that if I had time to, it would be me working with staff doing it. And I just, right now, I just don't have the time. But it's important that we're thinking about this more long-term, and this would give us an opportunity to see if we could make some minor changes that could have some big impact for our residents that wouldn't create large costs moving forward. But the grant would give us the opportunity to pilot it, so we're not testing it at a cost, even small.
And Sophie, I know I had a chance, I talked to Belle, but when it says where we've got this kind of this definition or narrative under number 5, more than 3 units, our ordinance says more than 4 units. So I think, so I don't know, for purposes of hauling, we're kind of in a weird, I don't know which one matters, but just so the committee knows that I've been looking at more than 4 units as residential, as non-residential, I mean non-commercial.
And I think you should continue to do that. And we will modify here as we need to.
Okay.
I'm in favor of this program, but I had a couple of questions. I don't know if now is the appropriate time to ask them, but is this something that the town would take on as collection, or is it would be piggyback to Casella?
So my understanding, based on the conversations that we've had to this date, is that we're looking at creating a drop-off location at the landfill, so that people would be able to use their sticker, or if they were living in an apartment that wouldn't normally have residential collection, they could call and get a pass that they would then have access to the landfill for the purpose of recycling only. So we're looking at what does that look like long-term in terms of collection. Rob's gonna have to do some negotiation to figure out how much it would add to collect it. But what would be really helpful for us is to understand how much we're actually gonna generate. So by doing a pilot program, getting the word out as quickly as we can to try to get the most use that we can under the grant program, we would then be able to come back and say, this is how much it would cost, this is how we could pay for it, or this is why it's important that we absorb this cost, or, you know, the decisions that we make all the time.
Mhm.
But the idea is not to add an element of our curbside collection or to put dumpsters in certain private property. We can't do things like that. We've got to make it more general so that we're meeting the general service standards and service level for the community.
And also for our building owners and you know, our complexes and things like that, we're also not making it mandatory. Like, this is trying to find a way to, so that people aren't saying, well, I don't want to pay another cost. You know, and so we are, so yeah, so working hard to make it equitable, there's that word again, for the students, for the residents, for the building owners, for the town, for the municipality. But there is an opportunity through the state to really, you know, really set something up where there's a need. And so I think that's, you know, we're really kind of looking at the need, but also trying to make sure that we don't have any grumbling on the side. So.
Yeah, I'm supportive of filing for the grant and the pilot. I just, as always with everything we do, I like to just kind of monitor how much the town will end up taking on if the pilot's successful, and do we need to build that into our budgets? So
I agree with Cindy. I think it's a great program to explore. I'm sure there is a significant need there, and I appreciate Cheryl's willingness to lead us on this.
Ditto.
Yeah, Cheryl, I'm glad you're doing this. It's actually when I found out about this, actually sounds like a great opportunity. I also, just for food for thought, I kind of told Sophie about this. Up in the county, they do a program where they have these igloos, and they're basically colored igloos that represent certain recycling products that typically somebody just comes and grabs. So when you're looking at these, you may want to look at those avenues, because typically somebody can just walk in, drop stuff in it, and then they go away. And so that may be a very cost-effective way to do it without having to burden the town. We'll say, I'm not saying we're going to, but it doesn't go down the road where somebody in town has to take care of all that stuff. So it works great up there for those small communities. So it's just another thing to kind of look at.
I think one of the challenges, I think, is going to be access and transportation. I think some of the Housing Foundation, especially Talmar, and some of the elderly complexes don't necessarily have transportation. So we're going to be looking at that as well. So I mean, to actually get to our landfill. But like I said, we're just in baby step planning stages. So I will take your suggestion, Terry, and bring it to the committee. Thank you.
Any other thoughts, comments? Hearing none. I guess we'll move on to number 6, a brief town manager's update. Sophie?
I'm going to try to be brief. So things are really busy here. Today was a especially busy day. Elections are in full swing. We are in the absentee period, which has been going on for a while and will continue on through Election Day. People can request ballots online. They can contact the town office. There are written ballot applications outside the door of Town Hall that you can put in the ballot drop box and request your ballot that way. But if all else fails, you can call Town Hall and somebody can help you. Ballots can be returned via mail. They can be put in the drop box. If they go in the drop box, please do not waste your money and put a stamp on it. We don't require that. People can vote in person absentee. We had in-person absentee voting all day today in council chambers. On Saturday, that's going to be available on campus at the field house. And then back here Thursday, the 22nd of October and Friday, the 30th of October, both of those dates in council chambers. Polls are open from 7:30 a.m. until 5 o'clock p.m. Just remember, this is an absentee process. So when you go through, you're given the ballot and the envelope, and you vote it, you put it in, you seal it, and they sign it in as a ballot that's been received, and then you put it in the ballot box. At this point, as of late this afternoon, 2,374 absentee ballots have been requested and 1,400 had been returned. So Shelley and her volunteers, it's really neat to see. We have more and more volunteers coming in and really working hard. So they're doing a great job. I did get a request, inquiry from someone who was concerned that people would read their absentee ballots and attribute their vote to them. We went through the process today with Shelley and Belle, and I will tell you, by the time you get to the other side of the ballot, you have no idea who voted that ballot. It is a very secret process. There is absolutely no way that the person voting the ballot knows how you voted. So it's a secret process. Bond, you've been with me on the great bond trip. We got everything ready, and this morning Tom Perry came in and sat with me through 2 phone calls where we gave the okay to send our bonds to market. And then he came back 2 hours later, and we learned 3 hours later, and we learned that most of the bonds sold. Working with Piper Sadler, we have an arrangement where they picked up any of the unsold bonds at the price that they quoted in their most recent, in what they sent to market. So they picked up about $2.1 million of our bonds, the older bonds, and the rest of them all sold. And there was actually some negotiation. We oversold some, which is great for us. The market, I think I alluded to this in one of my updates. So as you recall, back when we started this venture, there was a ton of savings, and then it disappeared overnight, and it was going to cost us money to refinance. And then a couple months ago, we picked it back up, and we thought we were going to see about $650,000 worth of savings. We always knew that we wanted to sell the bonds well before the election, because we knew that that would create, the election day usually creates some volatility in the market. We were not really prepared for our president to tweet that he had COVID, and because when he tweeted that, the bond markets they tanked for us, which has really meant it went up as a flight to safety. And last week I had conversations with Tom, and I think Cindy, we talked about it, that we were losing the market. We were down to about $250,000 worth of savings. At that point, we felt like savings was still there, and we had already gotten the lion's share of the costs associated with floating the money. And so we felt like we needed to move forward. So we did that today. Last night, they predicted about $429,000 worth of savings, and we came in at $414,000 worth of savings. So we have saved the taxpayers $414,759.03 on the repayment of existing debt, and we've taken $2.25 million for prioritized and much needed infrastructure projects moving forward. These rates are locked in. We got verification from the independent audit firm that reviews the numbers to make sure that all of the assumptions are correct and we've held enough money in escrow and everything works. They've come back with their final formal opinion that everything is great. So now Cindy and I are going to get writer's cramp as we sign all of the documents necessary to float these bonds. The sale date is October 29th, and then we should have the money on hand for the new money. The old money will stay in escrow and be paid out of that. So that was huge work, and the finance team and Rob did an amazing job getting us what we needed for that. You also have 2 counselors who came in and did the rating calls, and it made a really big impression. So I really appreciate the extra time that they've taken to help us with this. This week, we also opened
Sophie, I don't mean to interject, but I just want to make 2 comments before we pass on real quick. First of all, about your first point, election. Again, kudos to the entire election team working on it. It's incredible what they're doing. You hear about terrible things. And to everybody involved with what this last update, oh my God, thank you. And to the counselors who did this, I was not one of them who made the calls. I'll own that. But thank you. That's fantastic. That's really excellent work. And thank you. And thank Tom and whoever else was in on that. So well done.
Yes, I second that, but also what's a rating call?
So the town, are you all right with me taking that, Tom? Or did you want? Okay. So the town is independently rated by Standard & Poor and Moody's. We have that rating, just like your credit rating, when you go for a loan, dictates what your interest rate would be or what you would qualify as. Every time we go to float loans, we have to get these independent ratings complete. There is a book, this thick, that we create that talks about Orono, our finances, what an awesome town we have, and what the bonds that we're trying to float are for and how we intend to pay them back. The rating calls, the Standard & Poor's and Moody get a draft of that book about 3 days before the rating call. And then we have about an hour on the phone with them, 45 minutes to an hour, to answer all the questions that come out of that and to put our best foot forward. What we know is that the incredible efforts of the University of Maine and town working with UMaine, and the fact that we have not seen major upheaval in our local economy because of COVID-19, because of having to shut down again, that played very well in us being able to maintain our credit rating. So credit rating, you've got A, AA, or AAA, AA, A, and then you get into the lower levels. Each one of those levels has 3 levels. AA credit is pretty darn good, especially for a small community. We're at AA minus or AA3, which is the last tier of AA, but we're in the top 20% of credit scores, which is pretty good. That is where the top 20% would be. It is a bit of tap dancing on a rating call because you've got to be honest. You can't make stuff up, but you're also trying to show that your town is well managed, that the council is conservative, that fiscally conservative, that the economy is going to grow and be stable. And Tom and Cindy just did a wonderful job as cheerleaders for Orono, and Dick and I tried to fill in the best we could.
Thank you. Sophie, before you move on, I also have a question about voting. Do you have any idea how many people showed up today?
Last count,
like from,
yeah. So
I know it was 147 at 4:30
cool.
and open for another half hour.
What we are really happy about with this setup, though, is that it is a trickle. It's like a steady trickle of people, as opposed to lines, people, having to wait. I think we're really able to do the social distancing piece much better. So it feels a lot safer to be in here.
And those aren't the people who asked for ballots to be sent to them. These are people who came to do early absentee voting.
Yeah, I suppose they could bring their absentee ballot back though. But
And
it
we
is
had a couple
not,
people do that today, actually. They wanted to
But
come
it-
drop it in.
but it is not early voting. You're putting it in an envelope, you're sealing it as, it's an absentee ballot. It's the same process we have used for decades.
Yeah, I did it at 7:35 this morning and it went very smoothly. It was very good.
So it's
Thank
called,
you.
it's not called early voting, it's called in-person absentee voting.
Yes. So, ready to move on from elections and bonds? Well, those are major issues. We also opened up the request for proposals for the sidewalk project, which is the safety upgrades and ADA upgrades to the Main Street corridor for pedestrian and cyclist safety. We had a really nice collection of submittals that ranged the state. And the committee spent quite a bit of time talking about the proposals. Ultimately, we are going to be suggesting that to council to award the consulting agreement to Sebago Technics of South Portland. It's a company that we have worked with in their engineering and traffic work. What really impressed me with this particular submittal is they've got a bike pedestrian specialist, and they're really thinking about the corridor and how it will work. So that is
this is the engineering and design of the whole project. This isn't the implementation yet.
so ultimately the agreement is going to be for the all of the consulting work that gets us through with the advisory committee, which is a group of citizens, the potential options that will bring, the preferred option that will come back to council. That is all part of the cost that we'll talk about on Monday night, because we phase the costs. But this is the company, this is the engineering firm that we are saying we will use for the design work, the pre-design work, the design work. They will ultimately do the drawings for the project, and they will go through the process of the bid, contract administration, inspection, that the whole kit and caboodle. We just break the budget up into multiple.
Yep.
So one of the reasons I bring this up is that Rob and I spent some time today. We've been working through people to invite to be part of that advisory group. And you might start hearing about it in the community, but these are folks that we think have a particular interest in this corridor. We have talked to before. They're people that are going to, or people that are going to be instrumental in the rollout of the project, meaning their property is going to be dramatically impacted, or we know that they will speak for their neighbors in a way that they've engaged us before, and they, so they're just people that are already connected in with the project somehow. But I didn't want to get out there and start asking people to be part of an advisory group and have council be like, what? But this is a staff advisory group. So just to let you know that we continue to work through as the fall comes in. We're seeing a spike, I think you see it nationally, of COVID cases, which has us looking at operations and how we are going to communicate with staff around potential exposures. We've got the holidays coming up, and as people get together, especially indoors, it creates a higher risk. So we're going to be looking at that. We're also going to be looking on a departmental basis. We're working through with departments, especially departments like Public Works and WPCF, how we're going to function when we have operations that have to continue if we are short people, or if we reach a place where we have, a high degree of exposure here in Orono. So we're working through that process. I think on the committee agenda for finance and operations coming up in November, I think we've got a visit from from Rob to talk about kind of our plan for snow plowing, because that's not something we can say, gee, I'm sorry, people have had to quarantine and we can't plow snow today. Rob's given that a lot of thought, so we'll talk with him a little bit about that. And then on top of everything else hitting my inbox today, we received the draft financial statements from the auditor. So this tells me that we will be in good shape at the November Finance and Operations Committee to do the annual video, presentation. And I will just say, we had 5 adjusting entries this year, one of which staff had already done. It was not the auditor that did it, it was a staff adjustment. So we went from 7 pages when I started to 5 adjusting entries this year, which is really 4, which kind of, I had to deflate Connie's head a little bit to get her out the door this afternoon. So I think finance did a really nice job with that. And I'm sure there's more happening, but I just don't have it written down on my list, so it's not in my head.
Well, you know what? Connie can walk around with an inflated head all she wants, because there's another one of the many people who work for this town that do an amazing job, and I'm thankful that they work in a town that I live in. So
Absolutely.
awesome, awesome, awesome. So are there any last thoughts before we all say goodbye?
All set.
Stay safe, everybody.
I have no thoughts, not even last ones.
All right. Well, thank you all so much, and we'll see you soon.
Great
Thank
to see you
you,
all.
guys.
Bye, everybody.
Alrighty, bye-bye, good night.